The morning sun was just starting to shine through the small window of Henrik's bedroom. The 8-year-old boy woke up to the sound of his grandmother making noise in the kitchen below. He could smell bread cooking and hear her humming an old song. But today felt different. There was something special in the air. Henrik jumped out of his small bed and ran to the window. He pressed his face against the cold glass and looked down at the street. People were already walking around, even though it was still early. Women were hanging Norwegian flags from their windows. Men were talking in small groups on the street corners. Children were running around with excitement. "Grandmother," Henrik called out as he ran down the wooden stairs. His bare feet made soft sounds on each step. "Why is everyone outside so early?" His grandmother, Anna, turned around from the stove. She was a small woman with gray hair tied back in a neat bun. Her blue eyes looked tired, but they always became warm when she looked at Henrik. She had been taking care of him for 2 years now, ever since his parents died in an accident. "Today is a very special day, my dear boy," she said with a gentle smile. "The Royal Guard is coming to our town. They will march right through our main street." Henrik's eyes grew wide with wonder. He had heard stories about the Royal Guard. These were the brave soldiers who protected the King of Norway. They wore beautiful uniforms and carried shiny rifles. They marched like heroes from the old stories his father used to tell him. "Will they really come here, to our small town?" Henrik asked. He could hardly believe it. "Yes, they will," Anna replied. "But remember, Henrik, these are difficult times. Our country is not free right now. The German soldiers are still here, watching everything we do." Henrik knew about the war. He had seen the German soldiers walking through their town many times. They wore different uniforms, gray and green. They looked serious and sometimes scary. The people in town always became quiet when the German soldiers came near. But the Royal Guard was different. They were Norwegian, just like Henrik and his grandmother. They represented hope and freedom, even during these dark days of 1943. After eating his breakfast of bread and milk, Henrik helped his grandmother with her morning work. He fed the 3 chickens they kept in their small backyard. He brought water from the well at the end of their street. But all the time, he kept thinking about the Royal Guard. Around 10 in the morning, Henrik heard a new sound. It was the sound of drums beating in a steady rhythm. Then he heard the sound of many feet walking together, all at the same time. His heart started beating faster. "They're coming," he shouted. Henrik ran to the front window of their small house. His grandmother came and stood behind him. She put her gentle hands on his shoulders. Together, they looked out at the street. The Royal Guard was marching down their street in perfect lines. There were about 30 soldiers, all walking in step with each other. Their uniforms were dark blue with bright buttons that shined in the sunlight. Each soldier carried a rifle on his shoulder. Their boots made a strong, rhythmic sound on the stone street. The leader of the group was a tall man with a serious face. He had medals on his chest and walked with great pride. His eyes looked straight ahead, but Henrik could see strength and determination in them. As the Royal Guard marched past Henrik's house, some of the townspeople came out to watch. They stood quietly, but Henrik could see pride in their faces. These soldiers represented their country, their freedom, and their hope for better days ahead. Henrik pressed his small hand against the window glass. He wished he could be brave like those soldiers. He wished he could help his country somehow. Little did he know that very soon he would get his chance to be a hero. The Royal Guard continued marching toward the town center, where the main square was located. Henrik watched until they disappeared around the corner. The sound of their marching boots slowly faded away, but the feeling of excitement remained in his heart. "Will we see them again, grandmother?" Henrik asked. Anna squeezed his shoulders gently. "Perhaps, my dear boy. Perhaps." Neither of them knew that this would be the most important day in Henrik's young life. Neither of them knew that in just a few hours, Henrik would have to make a choice that would save many lives. The Royal Guard had brought hope to their town, but they had also walked into deadly danger. 3 days before the royal guard came to town, Henrik had been playing his favorite game. He liked to explore the old parts of the town, especially around the big stone church that stood on the hill. The church was very old, maybe 200 years old. It had a tall bell tower that reached up toward the sky like a finger pointing to heaven. Henrik's grandmother always told him to stay close to home, but sometimes his curiosity was stronger than his fear. That Tuesday afternoon, while Anna was taking her daily nap, Henrik quietly left the house. He wanted to look for interesting stones and maybe catch some bugs near the church. The old church had many good hiding places. There were big stones, old trees, and small spaces where a boy could crawl and pretend to be a brave explorer. Henrik was playing behind a large gravestone when he heard voices coming from inside the church. At first, he thought it might be the priest talking to someone. But these voices sounded different. They were speaking in German, not Norwegian. Henrik felt his stomach get tight with fear. German soldiers were inside the church. Henrik's father had taught him some German words before he died. His father was a smart man who could speak 3 languages. He always said, "Henrik, knowledge of languages is like having a key to many doors." Now, Henrik wished he did not have this key. He wished he could not understand what the German soldiers were saying. The boy crept closer to the church wall. There was a small window near the ground that was broken. Through this window, Henrik could hear the voices more clearly. His heart was beating so loud, he was afraid the soldiers might hear it. "The plan is simple," said one German voice. It belonged to an officer. Henrik could tell by the way he spoke with authority. "The Norwegian Royal Guard will march through the town square on Friday morning at 11 o'clock. "Yes, sir," replied another voice. This one sounded younger, maybe a regular soldier. "We will position 3 snipers in the church bell tower," the officer continued. 2 more snipers will be in the buildings around the square. When the Royal Guard reaches the center of the square, they will be surrounded. Henrik felt like ice water was running through his body. He could not believe what he was hearing. The German soldiers were planning to kill the Royal Guard. They were going to shoot them like animals in a trap. "How many Norwegian soldiers will be in the parade?" asked the younger German voice. "Intelligence reports say about 30 men, the officer replied. "They will be marching in formation, easy targets. We will eliminate the entire unit in less than 2 minutes. The word eliminate made Henrik feel sick to his stomach. He knew what that word meant. It meant kill. It meant murder. It meant that 30 brave Norwegian soldiers would die, and their families would cry, and their children would grow up without fathers. "What about the civilians in the square?" the younger soldier asked. "Acceptable casualties," the officer said in a cold voice. "If some townspeople get hurt, it will teach the others not to celebrate Norwegian symbols." Henrik had to put his hand over his mouth to stop himself from making a sound. These men were not just planning to kill soldiers. They were willing to hurt innocent people too, maybe even children like himself. "The weapons will be brought here tomorrow night," the officer continued. "We will set up our positions early Friday morning. The bell tower gives us a perfect view of the entire square. The Royal Guard will never know what hit them." Henrik heard footsteps moving around inside the church. The voices were getting closer to his hiding spot. Panic filled his small body like cold water. He had to get away from there before the German soldiers came outside and found him. Moving as quietly as a mouse, Henrik crawled away from the broken window. He stayed low behind the gravestones until he was far enough away to stand up and run. His legs felt weak, but he forced them to carry him down the hill and back toward his grandmother's house. As he ran, the terrible words kept repeating in his mind. Snipers. Bell tower. 11 o'clock. Eliminate. Friday morning. The Royal Guard was walking into a trap, and Henrik was the only person in the whole world who knew about it. When he reached his grandmother's house, Henrik quietly opened the door. Anna was still sleeping in her chair by the fireplace. He went to his room and sat on his bed, trying to understand what he should do with this terrible knowledge. Henrik was just 8 years old. He was small for his age and sometimes still afraid of the dark. But now he carried a secret that could save 30 lives or watch 30 good men die. The weight of this knowledge felt heavier than anything he had ever carried in his young life. That Tuesday night, Henrik could not sleep. He lay in his small bed, staring at the ceiling. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the German officer's cold voice saying, "Eliminate the entire unit." He saw the faces of the Royal Guard soldiers from his imagination, and he knew they had no idea what was waiting for them. Henrik tossed and turned until his blankets were twisted around his legs. The old wooden house made creaking sounds in the wind, and each noise made him jump. His grandmother always said the house was just settling down for the night, like an old person getting comfortable in bed. But tonight, every sound seemed scary. When morning came, Henrik felt tired and worried. His grandmother noticed something was wrong when he barely touched his breakfast. "Are you feeling sick, my dear boy?" Anna asked. She put her soft hand on his forehead to check for fever. "You look very pale." Henrik wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to pour out all the terrible words he had heard at the church. But how could he explain it? His grandmother was old and frail. The shock might be too much for her heart. And what could she do anyway? She was just one old woman in a town full of German soldiers. "I'm okay, grandmother," Henrik lied. "Just a little tired." But he was not okay. The secret felt like a heavy stone in his chest, making it hard to breathe. All day Wednesday, Henrik tried to think of what to do. He considered many different plans, but each one seemed impossible. First, he thought about going to the police station. But Henrik knew that some of the local police worked with the German soldiers now. His father had told him that during wars, it was hard to know who you could trust. If Henrik told the wrong policeman, they might warn the Germans that someone knew about their plan. Then the Germans would just change their plan and kill the Royal Guard somewhere else. Next, Henrik thought about finding a way to contact the Royal Guard directly. But how could an 8-year-old boy get a message to soldiers? He did not know where they were staying or how to reach them. Even if he found them, would they believe a small child? Adults often did not listen to children, especially about important things. Henrik also thought about telling other adults in the town. Maybe Mr. Peterson, who ran the bakery, or Mrs. Hansen, who taught at the school. But the same problem existed. Who could be trusted? And even if they believed him, what could regular townspeople do against armed German soldiers? On Wednesday night, Henrik's worry grew even stronger. He kept thinking about the families of the Royal Guard soldiers. Somewhere, there were wives waiting for their husbands to come home. There were children waiting for their fathers. There were mothers and fathers waiting for their sons. All of these people had no idea that their loved ones were walking into a trap. Henrik got out of bed and went to his window. He looked out at the quiet street. A few German soldiers were walking on patrol, talking quietly to each other. Their voices reminded him of the voices he had heard at the church, planning murder. Thursday morning came with gray clouds and cold wind. Henrik felt like the weather matched his mood, dark and stormy. At breakfast, his grandmother noticed again that he was not eating well. "Henrik, you must tell me what is troubling you," Anna said with concern in her voice. "I have been taking care of children for many years. I know when something is wrong." Henrik looked at his grandmother's kind face. Her blue eyes were full of love and worry. For a moment, he almost told her everything. But then he imagined what would happen. She would be scared and upset. She might try to do something dangerous. She might get hurt because of his secret. "I keep having bad dreams," Henrik said. This was partly true. He did have bad dreams, full of gunshots and falling soldiers. Anna nodded with understanding. These are difficult times for everyone, especially children. The war makes us all have bad dreams sometimes. Thursday afternoon, Henrik walked around the town, looking at all the places the German officer had mentioned. He went past the church and saw the tall bell tower. He imagined snipers hiding up there with their rifles. He walked through the town square and looked at all the buildings around it. Any of those windows could hide more snipers. The square was not very big. When the Royal Guard marched into it, they would be completely surrounded. The German plan was perfect and deadly. 30 brave men would march into that square thinking they were safe, thinking they were just doing a ceremony for their people. They would never know what hit them. As Thursday evening came, Henrik realized he had less than 15 hours before the massacre would happen. 15 hours to save 30 lives. 15 hours to find a solution that his 8-year-old mind could barely understand. That night, Henrik barely slept at all. He stared out his window at the church bell tower in the distance. Somewhere in this town, German soldiers were probably getting their weapons ready. Somewhere else, the Royal Guard soldiers were probably polishing their uniforms and preparing for what they thought would be a simple march through a friendly town. Henrik was the only person who knew the truth. He was the only one who could prevent a terrible tragedy. But he was just a small boy in a big, dangerous world. How could someone so young and powerless save so many lives? Time was running out, and Henrik still had no idea what to do. Friday morning came too fast. Henrik woke up before sunrise, his heart already racing. Today was the day. In just a few hours, the Royal Guard would march into the town square, and the German snipers would be waiting for them. He had spent 3 days trying to think of a solution, and now time had almost run out. Henrik got dressed quickly and went downstairs. His grandmother was already in the kitchen, making breakfast and humming softly. She looked happy and excited about seeing the Royal Guard parade. If only she knew what Henrik knew, she would not be humming. "Good morning, my dear boy," Anna said with a smile. "Today is the special day. Are you excited to see the soldiers?" Henrik nodded, but his stomach felt sick. He tried to eat some bread, but it tasted like cardboard in his mouth. Every bite was hard to swallow. His grandmother noticed he was pushing his food around on his plate. "You are still not eating well," she said with worry. "Maybe you should stay in bed today if you are feeling sick." "No," Henrik said quickly. "I want to see the Royal Guard. I need to see them." Anna looked surprised by how strongly Henrik spoke, but she just smiled and patted his head. "Of course, dear. We will watch them together from our window." After breakfast, Henrik went back to his room and sat on his bed. He put his head in his hands and tried to think. There had to be something he could do. There had to be a way to warn the Royal Guard without getting himself or his grandmother killed. Then Henrik remembered something his father had told him before he died. His father had been a soldier in the First World War many years ago. He used to tell Henrik stories about how soldiers communicated with each other during battles. "Sometimes, Henrik," his father had said, "when you cannot use words to send a message, you must use signals. Soldiers have used flags, mirrors, smoke, and hand movements to talk to each other across great distances." A signal. That was it. Henrik jumped up from his bed with excitement. He could not walk up to the Royal Guard and tell them about the ambush, but maybe he could send them a signal. Maybe he could warn them without using words. But what kind of signal could an 8-year-old boy make that soldiers would understand? Henrik paced around his small room, thinking hard. He needed something that would clearly mean danger or stop or do not go forward. Then Henrik remembered another story his father had told him. Pirates used to fly black flags with white skulls and crossbones to warn other ships that they were dangerous. The skull and crossbones was a symbol that meant death and danger. Everyone knew what it meant, even if they spoke different languages. Henrik ran to his grandmother's bedroom and looked through her things. He found an old white bedsheet that she kept in a wooden chest. It was big and white and clean, perfect for making a flag. Next, Henrik went to the fireplace downstairs. He took a piece of charcoal from the pile of coal his grandmother used for cooking. The charcoal was black and would make good marks on the white sheet. Henrik spread the bedsheet on the kitchen table. With the piece of charcoal, he began to draw. His hands were shaking with nervousness, but he tried to make his drawing as clear as possible. He drew a large skull, just a circle with 2 dark holes for eyes and a smaller hole for a nose. Below the skull, he drew two lines crossing each other to make the crossbones. It was not a perfect drawing, but it was clear enough. Anyone who saw it would know it meant danger. But how could he turn this into a flag? Henrik looked around the kitchen and saw his grandmother's old broom leaning against the wall. The wooden handle was long and straight, perfect for a flagpole. Henrik carefully tied one edge of the bedsheet to the broom handle. He used some string that his grandmother kept in a drawer. When he was finished, he had a white flag with a black skull and crossbones drawn on it. "What are you doing, Henrik?" His grandmother's voice came from behind him. Henrik spun around, his heart jumping. Anna was standing in the kitchen doorway, looking confused and worried. She saw the bedsheet tied to her broom, and she saw the dark drawing on the white cloth. "Henrik, what is this?" she asked, walking closer. "Why did you draw such a frightening picture on my good bedsheet?" Henrik's mind raced. He could not tell her the truth. It would scare her too much. But he needed to take his flag outside. The royal guard would be coming soon. "I wanted to make a pirate flag," Henrik said quickly. "Like in the stories Father used to tell me. I want to show it to the soldiers when they march by." Anna looked at the flag and shook her head. "Henrik, this is not appropriate. The soldiers are coming to bring us hope and pride. We should not show them symbols of death and danger. What will they think of us?" She reached for the flag, trying to take it away from him. But Henrik held on tight. "Please, grandmother," he said, his voice getting desperate. "Please let me keep it. It is very important to me." Anna saw the tears starting to form in Henrik's eyes. She saw how important this seemed to be to him. Even though she did not understand why, she could see that her grandson needed this for some reason. "Oh, Henrik," she said with a sigh. "I suppose if it makes you happy, but promise me you will not do anything dangerous with it." Henrik hugged his grandmother tight. "I promise I will be careful," he said. But even as he said the words, Henrik knew he was about to do the most dangerous thing he had ever done in his life. In less than an hour, he would take his warning flag out into the street, where German soldiers might see him. He would try to warn the royal guard about the ambush, even though it might cost him his life. As Henrik looked out the window, he could see people starting to gather on the street. The royal guard would be coming soon. His desperate plan was ready, but would it work? And would he survive long enough to see if he had saved 30 brave men from certain death? At 10:30 in the morning, Henrik heard the sound he had been waiting for and dreading at the same time. In the distance, he could hear drums beating. The steady rhythm meant the royal guard was coming. They were marching through the streets toward the town square, walking straight into the deadly trap. Henrik grabbed his homemade flag and ran to the window. His grandmother was already there, looking excited and happy. Other people on the street were coming out of their houses. Women were holding small Norwegian flags. Children were jumping up and down with excitement. Old men were standing proudly with their hands over their hearts. Nobody knew what was about to happen. Nobody knew about the snipers hiding in the church bell tower and the buildings around the square. Nobody except Henrik. "They are coming," Anna said happily. "Listen to those drums, Henrik. Does it not make you feel proud to be Norwegian?" Henrik nodded, but his throat felt too tight to speak. His hands were shaking as he held his warning flag. The skull and crossbones drawing looked dark and scary against the white bedsheet. He knew his grandmother was right. It was not the kind of flag people usually showed to celebrate, but it was the only way he could think of to warn the soldiers about the danger. The sound of marching feet was getting louder. Henrik could hear the soldiers' boots hitting the stone street in perfect rhythm. Left, right, left, right. They were probably smiling and feeling proud as they marched through the town. They had no idea that death was waiting for them in the square. "I need to go outside," Henrik said suddenly. "Outside?" Anna looked surprised. "But we can see perfectly well from here. Why do you want to go outside?" Henrik's mind raced to find an answer that would not make his grandmother suspicious. "I want to get closer to the soldiers. I want to see their uniforms better." and I want to wave my flag where they can see it." Anna looked at the skull and crossbones flag again. She still did not like it, but she could see how important this was to Henrik. "Very well," she said with a sigh. "But stay close to the house. Do not go far, and come back inside as soon as the soldiers pass by." "I promise," Henrik said, though he knew he might not be able to keep that promise. Henrik ran to the front door and opened it. The sound of the approaching royal guard was much louder now. He could hear people cheering and clapping from other streets. The soldiers were probably just 2 or 3 blocks away. Henrik stepped outside and looked down the street. He could see the first soldiers turning the corner. They looked magnificent in their dark blue uniforms with shiny buttons. Their rifles were held perfectly straight on their shoulders. The leader was a tall man with a serious face and medals on his chest. But Henrik also noticed something else that made his blood run cold. On the rooftops and in some of the windows around the town square, he could see small movements. The German snipers were already in position. They were hiding in the shadows, waiting for the royal guard to walk into their trap. Henrik's heart was beating so fast, he thought it might explode. This was it. This was the moment when he had to act. If he did nothing, 30 brave men would die in just a few minutes. If he tried to warn them, he might die too. But he could not let those soldiers walk into the square without trying to save them. Henrik ran into the street, holding his flag high above his head. Some of the townspeople looked at him strangely. A few adults tried to grab him, thinking he was just an excited child who was getting in the way. "Henrik, come back here," his grandmother called from the doorway. But Henrik kept running toward the approaching soldiers. The royal guard was now just 1 block away. Henrik could see their faces clearly. They looked proud and strong and brave. The leader's eyes were focused straight ahead, looking toward the town square where he planned to complete the ceremonial march. Henrik positioned himself directly in the path of the marching soldiers. He waved his skull and crossbones flag back and forth as hard as he could. The white bedsheet flapped in the morning breeze, and the black skull drawing was clearly visible. "Danger!" Henrik shouted in Norwegian as loud as his young voice could manage. "Stop! Do not go to the square. Danger!" But his small voice was lost in the sound of marching boots and cheering townspeople. The soldiers kept marching forward, getting closer to the square where the snipers were waiting. Henrik waved his flag even more frantically. He jumped up and down, trying to make himself taller so the soldiers would notice him. He pointed toward the buildings around the square, trying to show them where the danger was hidden. Some people in the crowd were now looking at Henrik with confusion and concern. Why was this little boy waving a death flag at the brave soldiers? Why was he shouting about danger? A few adults moved toward him, trying to pull him out of the street. "Leave me alone," Henrik cried, pulling away from their hands. "I have to warn them. I have to." The royal guard was now very close. Henrik could see the leader clearly. The man was tall and strong, with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. His name tag said Captain Anderson. Henrik hoped desperately that this captain would understand his warning. Henrik took a deep breath and used all his strength to wave the flag and point toward the square. He shouted again, "Captain, danger in the square. Snipers, do not go there." For just a moment, Captain Anderson's eyes met Henrik's eyes. The captain looked at the small boy waving the strange flag. He saw Henrik pointing frantically toward the town square. Something in the boy's desperate movements made the captain slow his pace slightly. But the other soldiers kept marching. They were trained to follow their leader and maintain formation. They were almost at the town square now. In less than 1 minute, they would be in the center of the square, surrounded by hidden snipers with loaded rifles. Henrik's warning flag was flying in the wind, but would it be enough? Would Captain Anderson understand what the small boy was trying to tell him? Or would Henrik watch helplessly as 30 brave men walked to their deaths? The next few seconds would decide whether Henrik's desperate plan would save lives, or whether he had failed in his mission to prevent a massacre. Captain Lars Anderson had been a soldier for 15 years. He had fought in battles, led men through dangerous missions, and survived 2 years of war by trusting his instincts. Those instincts had saved his life many times before, and now they were telling him something was very wrong. The captain's sharp eyes focused on the small boy in the street. This was not normal behavior. Children usually waved regular flags and cheered when soldiers marched by. They did not wave flags with skulls and bones. They did not shout about danger. They did not look so desperate and frightened. Captain Anderson had seen that look before, in the eyes of scouts who had spotted enemy troops, in the faces of civilians who had witnessed something terrible. This boy was not playing a game. This boy was trying to warn them about something. Henrik was still jumping up and down, waving his flag frantically. He was pointing toward the town square ahead of them. His young voice was calling out words that Captain Anderson could barely hear over the sound of marching boots, but the boy's movements were clear. He was saying stop and danger and do not go there. The captain's military training kicked in immediately. Rule number 1. When someone warns you about danger, you listen first and ask questions later. Rule number 2. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. Rule number 3. It is better to be embarrassed by a false alarm than to be dead from ignoring a real threat. Captain Anderson slowed his marching pace just slightly. His trained eyes began to scan the buildings around the town square. At first, everything looked normal. People were hanging flags from their windows. Families were standing on balconies to watch the parade. Children were waving from doorways. But then the captain noticed something that made his blood run cold. In the bell tower of the old church, there was a small flash of metal, sunlight reflecting off something shiny, something that could be the scope of a rifle. Captain Anderson looked more carefully at the buildings around the square. Now that he was paying attention, he could see tiny movements in several windows, shadows that did not belong there, shapes that looked like men hiding with weapons. The captain's heart began to beat faster, but his face remained calm. He could not let his men know there was danger until he was sure. Panic could be just as deadly as an ambush. He needed to be certain before he acted. Henrik was now running alongside the marching soldiers, still waving his warning flag. The boy was crying with frustration because the soldiers were still moving toward the square. "Please," Henrik shouted. "Please listen to me." Captain Anderson made a decision that went against all his military training. He turned his head slightly and looked directly at Henrik. "What danger?" he asked quietly, so only the boy could hear. Henrik's eyes grew wide with hope. The captain was listening to him. "Snipers," Henrik whispered as loudly as he dared. "In the church tower, in the buildings, they are going to shoot you in the square." The captain's blood turned to ice. Snipers, multiple positions, an ambush in the town square. Everything suddenly made perfect sense. This was why the boy was so desperate. This was why he was waving a death flag. He was trying to save their lives. Captain Anderson had to make the most important decision of his military career, and he had to make it in the next 10 seconds. His men were still marching in perfect formation toward the square. In less than 1 minute, they would be in the center of the killing zone. The captain could not simply shout ambush and break formation. That would cause panic and confusion. His men might scatter in all directions, making themselves easy targets. He needed a signal that would tell his soldiers to take cover immediately without alerting the snipers that their plan had been discovered. Captain Anderson remembered his training from the military academy. There was an emergency signal that all Norwegian soldiers knew. It was used when immediate action was needed, but silence was critical. The signal was simple. If the commanding officer dropped his weapon, it meant scatter and take cover immediately. The captain looked one more time at the buildings around the square. He could now clearly see at least 4 different sniper positions. The German soldiers were well hidden, but not well enough to fool someone who knew what to look for. Captain Anderson made his choice. Without breaking his marching rhythm, he shifted his rifle from his shoulder to his hands. To anyone watching, it would look like he was simply adjusting his grip on his weapon. But then, in one smooth motion that looked like an accident, Captain Anderson let his rifle slip from his hands. The weapon clattered loudly on the stone street, the sound echoing off the buildings around them. Every soldier in the Royal Guard knew what that sound meant. It was the emergency signal they had practiced dozens of times, but had never used in real combat. Drop weapon equals immediate danger equals scatter and take cover. The response was instant and perfect. Without a word, without a shout, without any panic, 30 Norwegian soldiers dove for cover. Some rolled behind parked cars. Others pressed themselves against building walls. A few jumped into doorways. All of this happened in less than 3 seconds. Captain Anderson grabbed Henrik and pulled him behind a large stone pillar just as the first sniper shot rang out from the church bell tower. The bullet hit the exact spot where the captain had been standing just moments before. "Good boy," Captain Anderson whispered to Henrik as more shots began to echo through the streets. "You saved us all." Henrik was shaking with fear and excitement, but he had done it. His desperate plan had worked. The Royal Guard was alive, and they were ready to fight back. The battle for the town square was about to begin. The sound of Captain Anderson's rifle hitting the stone street was like a thunderclap in Henrik's ears. For a split second, time seemed to stop completely. The captain was pulling Henrik behind the stone pillar, and Henrik could see the Royal Guard soldiers diving for cover in all directions. Then the first sniper shot exploded from the church bell tower. The bullet hit the cobblestones exactly where Captain Anderson had been standing just moments before. Small pieces of stone flew through the air, and Henrik felt the captain's strong arm pull him closer to safety. "Stay down," Captain Anderson shouted to Henrik. "Keep your head low and do not move." More shots began ringing out from different directions. The German snipers in the buildings around the square were firing rapidly, trying to hit the scattered Norwegian soldiers. But instead of hitting easy targets standing in formation, they were shooting at men who were already hidden behind cars, walls, and doorways. Henrik pressed his face against the cold stone pillar and tried to make himself as small as possible. His heart was beating so fast it felt like a drum inside his chest. The sound of gunshots was louder and more frightening than anything he had ever heard before. "My radio," Captain Anderson said, reaching for the communication device on his belt. "I need to call for backup." The captain spoke quickly into his radio in military language that Henrik did not understand. But Henrik could tell from the captain's voice that he was calling other Norwegian soldiers for help. He was telling them about the ambush and asking them to come to the town square immediately. Meanwhile, the Royal Guard soldiers were not just hiding and waiting. These were trained fighters who knew how to respond to an attack. From their hiding places, they began shooting back at the German snipers with their pistols and rifles. Henrik could hear Lieutenant Hansen, one of the younger officers, shouting orders from behind a car. "Johnson, can you see the sniper in the bakery window? Peterson, cover the church tower. Everyone else, watch for movement in the upper floors." The German snipers had expected to shoot fish in a barrel, soldiers standing together in the open square with nowhere to run. Instead, they found themselves in a real battle against trained Norwegian fighters who were ready for them. From his hiding spot behind the pillar, Henrik could see flashes of light from the windows where the German snipers were shooting. But he could also see flashes from the places where the Royal Guard soldiers were shooting back. The battle was fierce, but it was fair now. Both sides had weapons, and both sides had cover. The boy was right. Henrik heard Sergeant Olsen call out from behind a stone fountain. "There are at least 5 sniper positions: church tower, bakery, post office, hotel, and the old library." Captain Anderson looked down at Henrik with amazement and respect. "How did you know about this ambush?" he asked. How did a little boy discover what grown-up spies could not find? Henrik's voice was shaking, but he managed to answer. "I heard them talking at the church 3 days ago. They were speaking in German, but my father taught me some German words before he died. They said they would eliminate all of you in the square." "Your father taught you well," Captain Anderson said with a smile. "And you are the bravest boy I have ever met." Just then, Henrik heard a sound that made him feel both scared and hopeful at the same time. In the distance, he could hear vehicles approaching fast. The sound of truck engines and motorcycle motors was getting louder and louder. "That is our backup," Captain Anderson said with satisfaction. "Norwegian resistance fighters and more Royal Guard soldiers. The Germans picked the wrong town to try their ambush." The battle was about to become much more intense, but now the odds were changing. The German snipers had planned a quick and easy massacre, but Henrik's warning had turned it into a real fight. Instead of killing 30 Norwegian soldiers in 2 minutes, the Germans found themselves surrounded and outnumbered. From the church bell tower, Henrik could hear shouting in German. The sniper up there was probably calling for help on his own radio, telling his commanders that their plan had failed. But it was too late for the Germans to escape easily. "Stay close to me, Henrik," Captain Anderson said. "This battle is not over yet, but thanks to you, we have a real chance to win it." Henrik nodded and pressed himself closer to the stone pillar. He had done his part by warning the Royal Guard, but the fighting was not finished. The next few minutes would decide whether the Norwegian soldiers would capture the German snipers or whether more people would die in this unexpected battle. The sound of approaching vehicles was getting very loud now. Henrik could see dust clouds in the distance where trucks and motorcycles were racing toward the town square. Soon, this quiet Norwegian town would become the site of one of the most important small battles of the entire war. And it had all started with one small boy who was brave enough to wave a homemade flag and shout a warning that saved 30 lives. The sound of truck engines grew louder and louder until Henrik could feel the ground shaking under his feet. Captain Anderson smiled as he looked around the edge of the stone pillar. "Here comes the cavalry," he said to Henrik. "Norwegian resistance fighters and more soldiers. The Germans are about to get a big surprise." 3 military trucks roared into the town square, followed by 2 motorcycles with armed riders. The vehicles moved fast and stopped in positions that blocked all the escape routes from the square. Norwegian soldiers jumped out of the trucks with their weapons ready, and resistance fighters took positions behind the vehicles. Henrik watched in amazement as more than 40 Norwegian fighters suddenly surrounded the buildings where the German snipers were hiding. The hunters had become the hunted. "This is Captain Anderson," the captain shouted into his radio. "We have German snipers in 5 buildings around the square. Church tower, bakery, post office, hotel, and library. They are trapped now." The leader of the resistance fighters was a tough-looking man with a thick beard and hard eyes. His name was Commander Berg, and he had been fighting German soldiers for 2 years. He ran over to Captain Anderson's position, keeping low to avoid sniper fire. "Captain, what is the situation?" Commander Berg asked. "A planned ambush," Captain Anderson replied. "They were going to massacre my entire unit in the square, but this brave boy warned us just in time." He put his hand on Henrik's shoulder. Commander Berg looked down at Henrik with surprise. "This little one saved you." "All of us," Captain Anderson confirmed. 30 soldiers are alive because of his courage." Commander Berg nodded with respect. "Then we owe him a great debt. Let us finish this fight and capture these German murderers." The battle plan was simple but effective. The Norwegian forces would surround each building and force the German snipers to surrender. If they refused to surrender, the Norwegians would fight their way in and capture them. Henrik watched as teams of Norwegian soldiers moved carefully toward each building. They used cars and walls for cover, just like in the war movies he had seen, but this was real and much more frightening. The sniper in the church bell tower was the first to realize he was trapped. Henrik could see him through a small window high up in the tower. The German soldier was looking around desperately, probably trying to find a way to escape. But Norwegian soldiers had surrounded the church completely. "German sniper in the tower." Commander Berg called out through a megaphone. "You are surrounded. Come down with your hands up, and you will not be harmed. If you keep shooting, we will come up and get you." For a moment, everything was quiet. Then Henrik heard a voice calling down from the tower in broken Norwegian. "I surrender. Do not shoot. I am coming down." The church door opened slowly, and a young German soldier came out with his hands high above his head. He looked scared and tired. Two Norwegian soldiers ran forward and took his rifle away, then led him to one of the trucks. The sniper in the bakery was not so smart. He kept shooting at the Norwegian soldiers, trying to hit them through the windows. But Commander Berg had brought something special, a small cannon mounted on one of the trucks. "Last warning." Commander Berg shouted at the bakery. "Surrender now, or we will blow a hole in your building." The German sniper answered by shooting more bullets at the Norwegians. That was a big mistake. Commander Berg gave a signal to his men operating the cannon. There was a loud boom that hurt Henrik's ears, and a cannonball flew straight into the bakery's second floor. The explosion knocked out the entire wall where the sniper had been hiding. When the smoke cleared, Henrik could see the German sniper crawling out of the rubble. He was hurt but alive, and he was waving a white cloth to show he wanted to surrender. Norwegian soldiers ran into the bakery and brought him out. One by one, the other German snipers realized they had no choice but to give up. The sniper in the post office threw his rifle out the window and called for mercy. The sniper in the hotel came out with his hands up. The last sniper, hiding in the library, tried to run away through the back door, but Norwegian soldiers were waiting for him there too. In less than 20 minutes, the battle was over. All 5 German snipers were captured alive. Not a single Norwegian soldier had been killed, though 2 had small wounds from bullet fragments. Captain Anderson stood up and helped Henrik to his feet. "It is over, little hero," he said. "You can stand up now. The danger has passed." Henrik looked around the square in amazement. The place that was supposed to be a killing ground for 30 Norwegian soldiers had become a victory for his country instead. And it had all happened because he had been brave enough to warn the Royal Guard about the danger. "What will happen to the German soldiers?" Henrik asked. "They will be prisoners of war," Captain Anderson explained. "They will be kept safe until the war ends, then sent back to Germany. We do not kill prisoners, even if they plan to kill us." Henrik felt proud that his country's soldiers were honorable men who followed the rules of war, even with their enemies. As the Norwegian soldiers led the German prisoners away, Henrik realized that his part in this great adventure was finished. He had saved 30 lives, helped capture 5 enemy soldiers, and struck a small blow for Norway's freedom. But the best part was still to come. The news of Henrik's bravery spread through the town like wildfire. Within hours, everyone knew the story of the little boy who had saved the Royal Guard from a deadly ambush. People could hardly believe that an 8-year-old child had done something so incredible and dangerous. Henrik's grandmother, Anna, was the first to hear the full story. When Captain Anderson brought Henrik home after the battle, she was waiting by the door with tears in her eyes. She had heard the gunshots and explosions from inside the house, and she had been terrified that something terrible had happened to her grandson. "Mrs. Anna," Captain Anderson said respectfully, removing his military cap, "your grandson is the bravest person I have ever met in my 15 years as a soldier. He saved 30 lives today, including mine." Anna looked at Henrik with a mixture of pride, love, and worry. "My dear boy," she said, hugging him tightly, "what you did was very dangerous. But you were also very brave. Your father would be so proud of you." Captain Anderson explained everything to Anna. How Henrik had overheard the German soldiers planning the ambush, how he had kept the terrible secret for 3 days, and how he had made the warning flag to signal the danger. Anna listened with amazement, finally understanding why Henrik had been so worried and upset for the past few days. "I was so scared," Anna said, still holding Henrik close. "When I saw you run into the street with that strange flag, I thought you had lost your mind. I never imagined you were trying to save people's lives." Within a week, Henrik's story had spread far beyond their small town. Norwegian resistance fighters carried the news to other towns and cities. Soon, people all across occupied Norway were talking about the brave little boy who had outsmarted the German army. The story gave hope to everyone who heard it. If a small child could strike such a blow against the enemy, then maybe there was reason to believe that Norway would be free again someday. Henrik became a symbol of courage and resistance for the entire country. But Henrik's bravery also put him in great danger. The German authorities were furious that their carefully planned ambush had been ruined by a child. They began searching the town, trying to find the boy who had warned the royal guard. Henrik's life was now in serious peril. The Norwegian resistance movement immediately took action to protect their young hero. They created a secret network to move Henrik from house to house, keeping him hidden from the German soldiers. Sometimes he stayed with the baker, sometimes with the school teacher, sometimes with families he had never met before. Everyone wanted to help protect the boy who had saved so many lives. For the rest of the war, Henrik lived like a ghost. He could not go to school regularly or play openly in the streets like other children. But wherever he went, people treated him with great respect and affection. They called him our little guardian angel and the smallest soldier in Norway. Henrik's grandmother was also moved to different safe houses. The resistance fighters made sure that both Henrik and Anna were always protected, even though it was difficult and dangerous work. The war finally ended in May 1945, 2 years after Henrik's heroic action. When the German soldiers left Norway and the country was free again, Henrik could finally come out of hiding. He was now 10 years old, still small for his age, but much more serious and mature than other children his age. King Olav V of Norway had heard Henrik's story and wanted to meet the brave boy personally. A special ceremony was organized in the capital city of Oslo. Henrik and his grandmother were brought to the royal palace in a beautiful car, with Norwegian flags flying from the front. The ceremony was held in the palace's great hall, with hundreds of important people watching. Military officers, government officials, and resistance leaders all came to honor Henrik. But the boy felt nervous and shy with so many people looking at him. King Olav was a tall, kind man with gentle eyes. He knelt down so he could speak to Henrik at eye level. "Young Henrik," the king said, "you have brought great honor to Norway. Your courage saved many brave soldiers and helped our country in its darkest hour." The king pinned a special medal on Henrik's chest, the Street Olav Medal for exceptional courage. It was the highest honor that could be given to a civilian. Henrik was the youngest person in Norwegian history to receive this medal. "You are proof," King Olav said, "that heroes come in all sizes. Sometimes the smallest person can have the biggest heart and the greatest courage." Henrik looked up at the king and said quietly, "I just did not want the soldiers to die, Your Majesty. They were good men fighting for our country." The king smiled and patted Henrik's shoulder. "That is exactly what makes you a true hero, my boy. You acted not for glory or reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do." As Henrik grew up, he never forgot the lessons he learned during those frightening days in 1943. He learned that even small people can make a big difference. He learned that doing the right thing is sometimes scary but always important. And he learned that courage is not about being fearless. It is about being afraid but doing what needs to be done anyway. Henrik became a teacher when he grew up, and he spent his life teaching children about courage, kindness, and standing up for what is right. He often told his students, "You are never too small to make a difference. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by the most unlikely heroes." Henrik kept his medal for the rest of his life, but he always said the real reward was knowing that 30 good men had lived to go home to their families. That, he said, was worth more than any medal or ceremony. The little boy who waved a homemade flag to save the royal guard had become a man who understood that true heroism comes from caring about others more than you care about your own safety.